I seen a clip of NBA YoungBoy concert. He had a concert here in New Orleans, where I'm from. And in the concert, they're showing, they're surfing the crowd with the camera, and they're showing young Black boys in tears, crying, listening to NBA YoungBoy's music. Trauma music. But he's talking about the pain that he's been through. The pain of not feeling love, feeling abandoned. And these young kids are crying. This is more than just about music. This is about the conditions that Black young children in poverty are living in. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my podcast, Wokeitis with Harriet Eve 9. I am your host, Harriet Eve 9. And today is part 3 of the series that I wanted to do about the fake outrage, the selective outrage, and the hypocrisy regarding Young Miami's Spin That Song and the toxic Black culture and the degeneracy in hip hop music. As with all of my podcasts, my commentary is my opinion for entertainment purposes only. Let's talk about it.
Come through, I think I need you. I swear it's time to keep these feelings to myself. Now you're the one I'm thinking of. My higher ground, my rocket love. For gravity, I'd rather stay up here. So we can get away. Palm trees, beach views, every night, day. All I wanna hear is the images that we play. Sit right next to you. Not trying not to show how I feel about you. You wish away. We do what we want, I just wanna get away.
Hip hop music is the reason that Black men don't have impulse control. Hip hop music is because Black men are overly emotional. These Black men were not raised in two-parent households. They were raised by their mothers and they have anger issues. The entire Black community is degenerate because of hip hop music. And nobody ever says anything about poverty. I just thought that was weird to me. Now, mind you, these people who are speaking, these are educated people saying this, not just the sheeple. These are educated individuals who are saying the same nonsense. You honestly think somebody listened to a hip hop song and went out and committed a crime? Really? Let's remember, white young people are 60 to 70% of the listening audience for hip hop music. 60 to 70%. These are white youth. Why are they not going out and committing crimes? Why are they not degenerate? Why is it that they don't lack impulse control? Why is it that they don't have anger issues because they were raised by their single mother? Why is the white community not degenerate? Why is their culture not degenerate? 60 to 70% of their children is listening to hip hop music. It's not about the music. It's about Black children disproportionately are living in poverty. In fact, most of these kids in these urban areas are living below the poverty line. When I first was able to fully understand that poverty is a human engineered system and not failure of an individual, is when I actually understood what was meant by systematic oppression. According to the 2024 U.S. Census data, Black Americans make up 15% of the total U.S. population, but 25.4% of Black children are living in poverty. As opposed to Americans, white Americans make up 56% of the total US population, and 6.7% of white children are living in poverty. So you see that there is a huge number, drastically, disproportionately, Black children are living in poverty. There is a critical need for interventions to support children who are living in poverty to mitigate the adverse outcomes and to promote healthier brain development in children living in poverty. Poverty limits a child's brain development by shrinking the gray matter in regions responsible for learning and memory, and by causing structural changes in areas handling emotional regulation. This is primarily driven by chronic stress and a lack of cognitive stimulation, rather than a genetic difference at birth. Because of the developmental deficits, can significantly impact a child's educational trajectory. The American Psychological Association emphasizes the importance of early intervention programs, adequate nutrition, and accessibility to high quality education. Children living in poverty often exhibit reduced gray matter in the frontal and preparatory lobes of the brain. This region is what controls memory and emotional regulation, leading to higher rates of anxiety and difficulty adapting to school environments. Most children living in poverty are suffering chronic post traumatic stress disorder because of the environment in where they're living. The high crime rates, they have a lack in comprehension, they have memory problems, problem solving skills. They're living in chronic stress and they develop anxiety and depression due to the stressors of living in poverty. They have higher incidence of mental illness. They have poor communication skills, lack of impulse control, lower performances in school. The wiring of their brains is altered because they're living in poverty. The frontal lobe is a critical part of the brain responsible for higher executive functions like planning, decision making, problem solving, emotional regulation, controlling your behavior, impulse control. This is why these kids were deficit in these areas. It was due to these children living in poverty, being raised in poverty, born into poverty, with parents and generations of parents, grandparents, great grandparents, who all lived in poverty. And I was raised to believe that this was some sort of a generational curse. But the reality is, this was the effects of poverty on the brain, on the child's brain growing up, and how just the stressors of poverty stop their ability to be able to be critical thinkers, to be able to problem solve, to be able to control their emotions, to control their impulse. It was all starting to finally make sense to me. Yes, there are other factors, but poverty by far is the leading cause of the crime that you're seeing in these impoverished areas. These children are living in war zones. Gangs have taken over the neighborhoods. People are afraid to speak out and say who's committing crimes because they're afraid of retaliation, knowing that nobody really cares. The psychological warfare of the basic aspects of modern psychological operations has been known by many other names and terms, including military information support operations, political warfare, winning hearts and minds, and just blatant propaganda. We see this a lot in the media, and this is the reason why a lot of people have uh, turned away from legacy media or mainstream media to go to independent voices to get the truth. The problem that's happening right now is that you don't know who's actually independent until you actually see who's what they're actually going to talk about and what they're going to be honest about. Most of them are gaslighting people to believe that somehow what you think or what you see happening in these Black impoverished areas is not true. We don't need any more studies done for reparation purposes, for purposes to understand what has been done to Black Americans in America, to understand that this is a system of operations moving to keep Black Americans at the bottom of the caste system. There's never a discussion about white on white crime. In fact, I never even knew it was a thing until people kept talking about Black on Black crime. And I said, well, this is interesting. So white people don't commit crimes? Hispanic people don't commit crimes? Asian people don't commit crimes against each other? It's only Black people? Black people are the only people that are being studied. And the thing that absolutely lets me know that someone is not serious is when they start pulling FBI data and all arguing over FBI statistics as if those FBI statistics are facts. We know they're not. Anybody who knows anything about statistics knows that statistics are not facts. In fact, I named my podcast Wokeitis because of the so-called woke left extremists and the so-called woke right extremists. Neither side actually knows what the term woke actually means. But they're so indoctrinated by their political parties that they stopped being decent human beings a long time ago. If you don't share in their political beliefs, if you are not a part of their political party, there's no empathy for you. They have no empathy for anyone who does not share their extreme views in America. These people have lost their humanity. In fact, I believe most of them are mentally ill. That is what the itis is for. These people are insane with their views. The 1968 Carter Commission report got it right, but it was largely ignored because it didn't give the outcome that President Lyndon B. Johnson wanted, who was a staunch racist. The 1968 Carter report, issued by the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorder, concluded that white racism was the primary cause of the 1967 race riots and warned that the United States was moving toward two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. Here is an excerpt from the 1968 Kerner Report. It says, pent-up frustration boiled over in many poor Black American neighborhoods during the mid to late 1960s, setting off riots that rampaged out of control from block to block. Burning, battering, and ransacking properties, raging crowds created chaos in which some neighborhood residents and law enforcement operatives endured shockingly random injuries or death. Many Americans blame the riots on outside agitators or young Black men who represented the largest and most visible group of rioters. But in March 1968, the Kerner Commissioner turned those assumptions upside down, declaring white racism, not Black anger, turned the key that unlocked urban American turmoil. Bad policing practices, a flawed justice system, unscrupulous consumer credit practices, poor or inadequate housing, high unemployment, voter suppression, and other culturally embedded forms of racial discrimination all converge to propel violence, upheaval on the streets of Black American neighborhoods in American cities, North and South, East and West. And as Black unrest arose, inadequately trained police officers and National Guard troops entered affected neighborhoods, often worsening the violence. White society, the presidentially appointed panel reported, is deeply impacted in the ghetto. White institutions created, white institutions maintained it, and white society condones it. The nation, the Kerner Commission warned, was so divided that the United States was poised to fracture into two racially unequal societies, one Black, one white. United States President Lyndon B. Johnson constituted the Kerner Commission to identify the genesis of the violence in 1967 riots that took the life of 43 people in Detroit and 26 people in Newark, while causing fewer casualties in 23 other cities. The most recent investigation of the riot had been the McCone Commission, which explored the roots of the 1965 Watts riot and accused riffraff of spurring unrest, relying on the work of social scientists and in-depth studies of the nation's impoverished Black urban areas, or the ghetto as they were often called. The Kerner Commissioner reached a quite different interpretation about what actually caused the riots. Both the Kerner Commissioner and Newsweek proposed aggressive government spending to provide equal opportunities to Black Americans, and each one praised from Black American leaders and white liberals. Even so, the President of the United States was not a fan. Now, Johnson faced no pressure to respond to Newsweek, but it was rare for a president to offer no endorsement of a report produced by his own hand-picked commission. Still, that's what Johnson did. In the moments of strife, the commission determined fear drove violence through riot-torn neighborhoods. During the Detroit mayhem, the city at the time was saturated with fear. The National Guardsmen were afraid. The citizens were afraid. The police were afraid, the report said. The commission confirmed that nervous police and National Guardsmen sometimes fired their weapons recklessly after hearing gunshots. Intermittently, they targeted exclusive or non-existent snipers as a National Guardsman sought the source of gunfire in one incident. They shot 5 innocent occupants of a station wagon, taking the life of one of them. Contrary to some fear driven beliefs in the white community, the overwhelming number of people killed in Detroit and Newark were Black Americans, and only about 10% of the dead were government employees. The Newsweek findings did not go unnoticed, but the Kerner report created considerably more controversy. It rebutted a common critique, contrasting the mass of primarily European immigrants who crowded into the slums in the early 20th century and Black Americans who moved from the rural South to urban centers in the middle of the century. Because most immigrants gradually moved up America's society ladder, some have suggested that harder work would lead Black Americans out of poverty and into the middle class. To the contrary, the commission argued that the crush of immigrants occurred when the boom of industrialization was creating unskilled jobs more quickly than they could be filled. Black Americans, on the other hand, arrived as industrialization wound up and the supply of unskilled jobs plummeted. Also, racial discrimination limited Black America's ability to escape poverty. This report exposed the truth that America and Americans were not ready to hear. All of the political propaganda, all of the blatant lies, it ended with this report, which is why it was ignored. White European immigrants were brought in to work industrial unskilled jobs, to work their way into middle class. They were even subsidized by the United States government. These were immigrants. And Black Americans was denied any type of subsidized help from the government. And as soon as they showed up for these unskilled industrial jobs, the doors shut. They were no longer hiring. Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and Dr. Claude Anderson all spoke about how America was replacing Black Americans or ignoring Black Americans for white European immigrants. Now, this report was in 1968. Here we are in 2026, and the Democratic Party, are wanting Black people to fight for illegal immigrants and undocumented immigrants. What's insane is that there are some Black people who are actually fighting for illegal immigrants and undocumented immigrants with the Democratic Party, not realizing that this is the reason why 25% of Black American children are still living in poverty.
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps.
Now, according to Fox News, 7.2 million illegal immigrants crossed the border under the Biden-Harris administration, an amount greater than the population of 36 American states. Now, what's interesting about that is that Kamala Harris was the vice president, and she was also the border czar. And so this was the job, the one job that she had. Here's what she had to say.
There's one other topic I wanted to talk to you about, but let me just quickly put a button.
Okay.
Do you have any plans to visit the border?
I'm here in Guatemala today. At some point, we are going to the border. We've been to the border. So this whole thing about the border, we've been to the border. We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe. And I don't understand the point that you're making.
The school to prison pipeline describes how academic failure, especially in reading by 4th grade, correlates with a higher risk of incarceration. Students who struggle with reading at this critical stage are more likely to drop out of school and encounter legal problems. According to the statistics, 2/3 of children who cannot read by the 4th grade will end up in jail or on welfare. Over 70% of all inmates cannot read above the 4th grade level. 85% of juveniles in the court system are functionally low illiterate. Neuroscientists and psychologists from King's College in London did a study on 10,000 children in the United States ages 9 and 10, which is your 4th graders. They did MRI scans of the brains, and they found that children who were living in poverty, brains vastly different from the kids who were not living in poverty. They basically confirmed what previous studies have been saying over the decades. There were reports that were being released stating that 1 out of 4 Black men will be incarcerated at some point during their lifetime. And then in 2012, there was a report released by the Times-Picayune here in New Orleans, naming Louisiana as the world prison capital. And when I read this report, I said there is absolutely no way this could be true. How can Louisiana be the world's prison capital? Not the nation, the world. And so this is when I started doing some investigation into this, because I could not believe it. And once I started my investigation, it wasn't hard to figure out the reason why. Now, Louisiana is ranked 31st out of 50 states in the United States. How in the world can a state this small be the prison capital of the world? So when I started doing my investigation, the very first thing I noticed was Louisiana did not have a unanimous verdict. That means they had non-unanimous verdicts that was sending Black poor men to prison, some for life. The non-unanimous jury verdicts, were introduced in Louisiana in 1898, primarily to undermine the rights of Black defendants during the Jim Crow era. Now, the Jim Crow laws in Louisiana were implemented gradually from the late 19th century, with significant milestones including the 1890 Louisiana Separate Car Act and the 1896 Supreme Court case Plessy versus Ferguson, which upheld segregation. These laws institutionalized racial segregation and discrimination until the civil rights movement began to dismantle most of them in the 1960s. Now, with the non-unanimous jury verdicts, if 10 jurors said you were guilty, but one or two said you were not guilty, you still was considered guilty. And these people were getting football numbers up to life, even some the death penalty, off of non-unanimous juries. And it wasn't until 2018. In 2018, Louisiana voters approved an amendment to end the practice for future trials, but many individuals remain in prison under the previous non-unanimous convictions. Now, what's so terrible about this is that even though the voters voted to have this, to end this, there are many Black men in Louisiana right now still fighting for their freedom who was convicted with a non-unanimous jury. And then in 2020, Louisiana's non-unanimous jury verdicts were deemed unconstitutional by the United States Supreme Court in a case of Ramos versus Louisiana. This was in 2020, just 6 years ago. This landmark decision established the Sixth Amendment right to a unanimous jury that applies to all state trials, thereby invalidating the practice that had allowed convictions with less than unanimous juries, everybody agreeing. Now, when I first started doing my research for this, we did not have these laws. This was still on the books. And once this report came out in 2012, we started organizing. We knew that this law had to be changed. Now, we found out in 2012 when this report was released. And in 2018 is when it finally got on the ballot and we was able to vote to get rid of it. And even still, it wasn't retroactive. It was only from 2018 moving forward. So all of those men, innocent Black men, the majority of them, are still in jail fighting for their freedom. Now, months before this 2012 report came out, there was a report that came out in 2011 about the disproportionate unemployment rate for Black men in New Orleans. The report stated that 52% of Black men in New Orleans were unemployed, a staggering 52%. New Orleans is a predominantly Black city. Out of the 52% of Black men that were unemployed, 14% had college degrees. So they either had to move to another town in Louisiana or move completely out of Louisiana to get a job. These were Black men with college degrees who could not get a job, could not find a job. And so when I started looking at these reports, it made me go back to all of the things that was going on during the crack epidemic when I was coming up. There were police officers that were throwing drugs on these Black boys, throwing drugs on them, pretending they have drugs in their car, all kind of craziness. And these were innocent Black boys who were taking the charge and pleading guilty because they were afraid to take this to trial. They didn't have money, they were poor, they were uneducated, and they would have had a public defender. And a lot of these guys pled to these charges. Some of them got probation. Some of them had as little as 6 months. Some of them maybe got 2 years for crimes they didn't even commit. And this was making them convicted felons. So this was most of the reason why a lot of them couldn't get jobs. New Orleans had the most corrupt police department in the nation. You had New Orleans police officers that were putting out hits on civilians. New Orleans police officers that had drug dealers working in these different housing projects for them. New Orleans police officers that were worse than the criminals that was on the streets. They were raw. It was awful. In fact, there are 2 New Orleans police officers right now that is in the Louisiana State Penitentiary. The farm is what we call it. They also call it Angola. It used to be a slave plantation. And they turned it into a prison, basically just transformed slavery. They didn't end it. In the same year that this report came out, the NOPD was finally investigated by the United States Department of Justice for their years of corruption. Now, this didn't change the outcome of so many young Black men who lost their freedom and their lives because of the corrupt police officers. But at least something was starting to happen. The federal government was finally listening. Now, the decree was established to address the civil rights violations and other misconduct within the NOPD. It required the department to implement significant reforms to improve its practices and accountability. The decree was a result of comprehensive investigation by the United States Department of Justice, which identified systematic issues within the department. So as I'm doing my investigation and trying to put the pieces together, because I just could not believe that a small state, Louisiana, has more people incarcerated, disproportionately Black boys and Black men incarcerated than any other state in the nation, and how we are the prison capital of the world. It was just mind-boggling. I could not believe it. There was the same district attorney, he's a Democrat, white, who was in office for 30 years. He was in office the entire time all of this was going on, from 1973 until 2003. And the same sheriff, Orleans Parish prison sheriff, he was in office from 1974 to 2004, 30 years. Now, this district attorney was so corrupt, even the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, have written in their files of his corruption. And what I could never understand was how Black people was constantly voting for this man. And I'm like, how in the world is this man constantly being voted for? I couldn't understand it. Now, he was well connected. His name is Harry Connick. His son, Harry Connick Jr., playing the pianos, actor, whatever. His dad was a racist, and he was a corrupt district attorney. And so I'm sitting here wondering, I'm a teenager at this point, and I'm like, why are Black people voting for this man? He was connected to all of the prominent black families here in New Orleans. I won't name them. If you know, you know. And these people are held in high regard here in New Orleans. Many of them are attorneys themselves. He is even the godfather of some of their children. And he's doing all of this corrupt stuff to other black people. This man was so beloved that other attorneys would not even run against him because they knew he had the black vote. It was insane. And I just could not understand it. This piqued my curiosity. And so, upon further research, is when I found out that New Orleans had never had a black district attorney in history. Never. And I could not understand that. New Orleans is a predominantly black city and has been for all of my life. How have they never elected a black district attorney, and why they were all voting for this district attorney who was corrupt, blatantly corrupt? And I couldn't get it. And so as I started looking through the way everything was going with the prison system, the unemployment of black men, all of these things, it was like, this is just my opinion, it's like young black boys and men who lived in the different housing, public housing projects. They were feeding those boys living in poverty to the system to fill the Louisiana prisons up. And some sort of money was being exchanged. This is just my opinion. Louisiana, the good old boys club. These young, uneducated, poor black boys who were living in these impoverished areas did not stand a chance. They had them on every level. They had them in terms of the politics and the criminal justice system. Everything was surrounded. The district attorney's office was so corrupt. The the attorneys were leaving that place. It was like a carousel. It was a revolving door. And so finally, he left office. He retired. No one ever challenged him and won. This was a well organized, systematic approach to incarcerate black boys and black men who were living in poverty in Louisiana, to feed them to the prison industrial complex. And when you look at it, they really did not stand a chance. The corruption was widespread. The district attorney's office, the police department, the state judges, the federal judges, the politicians, the wardens of the different prisons, the sheriffs of the different prisons. Not only were they connected in terms of relationships, some of them were connected by blood. Now, what this did was it made me give these prominent black families here in New Orleans major side eye because, like I said, these are educated people. Some of them are attorneys. New Orleans has 3 HBCUs, 2 in the Ninth Ward, 1 is Mid City. They're about 20 minutes from each other. And some of these people who were pals of this district attorney, they were college professors. They were educators in the school system. They were attorneys. Some of them were even politicians. And I'm like, if I could see what was going on, and I'm just researching this stuff, these people are experts at this. How could they not see it? They basically took a seat at the table for money and turned a blind eye to all of these young boys who were being sold into the prison system. There were several allegations of systematic misconduct by Connick and his prosecutors. According to the Innocence Project, a national organization that represents incarcerated criminals claiming innocence, 36 men convicted in Orleans Parish during Connick's 30-year tenure as DA have made allegations of prosecutorial misconduct, and 19 have had their sentences overturned or reduced as a result. In the case of Sharice's cousins, Connick's attorneys withheld a key witness statement from the defense, arguing that the prosecution was under no legal obligation to disclose such information. As a result, Cousins was put on death row at the age of 16, but the conviction and death sentence was overturned after 4 years in 1999. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for watching. This concludes part 3 of my 3-part series regarding hip hop music, poverty, the effects of poverty on the brain, and toxic Black culture. If you like my channel, if you like my message, like the podcast, share it if you like, subscribe. Thank you guys. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Go, live and go.